You're wondering, how on earth do I improve my songwriting skills? And I'm going to give you the answer, and we're going to make it quick. Let's talk about it. A great way to improve at our songwriting skills is simply to isolate the specific skill we want to work on or we think is most necessary to work on and simply practice that. I basically like to look at this as our songwriting bottleneck. It's not really a speed issue necessarily, it's more of a quality issue. But for instance, if you feel like, hey, my melodies are really good, honestly, my chord progressions are really good, but my lyrics kind of suck, that would be a good sign that you want to specifically isolate lyric writing and simply work on that. Or maybe you're in a situation where instead you feel your lyrics are really good and you feel like your melodies are really good, but you feel like you're stuck in the same old boring chord progressions. In that case, you would want to isolate writing chord progressions and simply work on that. So we've already alluded to it, but let's say it plainly. Essentially, we could boil down the skill of songwriting into three main sub-skills. One is going to be the skill of writing chord progressions or just harmony in general. Another skill that is distinct from that is the skill of melody writing. And then a third skill that is the most distinct, because at least those two are both still music writing, there's also the writing of words, which is lyric writing. These three skills have almost no interconnection. You could be a great lyricist and terrible at writing music, or the other way around. So your first step is essentially being radically honest with yourself and figuring out which of those three main songwriting skills is your biggest weakness. And just because it's your biggest weakness doesn't mean it is a weakness. You might be good at all three, but I bet one of them you are weaker at than the others. That's going to be your bottleneck, and we're going to take that into step 2. So step 2 is really just figuring out how to isolate that sub-songwriting skill and specifically practicing that thing. Let's start with chord progressions. And because chord progressions is overly simplistic, we're going to expand it to harmony writing in general. So this could be something like working on writing hooks, such as a guitar hook or a piano hook, or it could be something like writing a catchy bass line. Basically any music that isn't melody writing. And a great way to isolate this skill and work on it, and luckily I think this is the easiest one of all to isolate, is simply to work on writing chord progressions and writing hooks. Maybe for every song you write, you decide, I'm going to write 10 different chord progressions. I'm going to write 5 different bass lines. I'm going to write 6 different guitar hooks. Or maybe go one step further and decide, no, every day for a month, I'm just going to take an hour and try to come up with 5 different chord progressions or hooks. I'm not even going to try to build them out into songs. After the 30 days, I can go back and figure out of those 30 times 5, which would be 150 different hooks and chord progressions that I came up with over that month. Now let me figure out which ones are the best and which ones should I then build into whole songs. This can still be something that even though you are practicing and isolating just the one thing, it still can be useful for actually leveraging that into real songs that you will finish. So how do we isolate and practice the next songwriting subskill, and arguably the most important, in melody writing? So I think there are 2 really great ways to isolate and practice melody writing. One is simply to practice improvising melodies with no chord progression at all. This could look like maybe you're just sitting in the car going to work by yourself, and instead of turning on a podcast or listening to music, instead you just sit there and hum different melodies. You're just improvising melodies off the top of your head. That could be a great way to practice. You also could practice writing melodies with something other than your voice. If you are proficient enough at guitar to do some solos, you could just do essentially some soloing, and that's your version of melody writing, because solos usually are types of melodies. Now, of course, you want to keep in mind that this is ultimately going to be something that's sung, so you can't play things too fast because people can't sing that fast, so you got to keep that in mind. But certainly you can write vocal melodies with instruments other than your voice. And the second way is simply to look up maybe on YouTube or something for a loop, a chord progression that just goes for 5 minutes, or you could make your own simple chord progression that goes for 5-10 minutes. You listen back to it, and you just improvise a melody to that chord progression. Now this is going to be important because most of the time when you're writing a melody, the skill you really want is the ability to write an interesting melody to an already existing chord progression. Because most of the time when you're writing songs, if you want to do it the easiest way, you're probably going to start with chord progression or harmony, some sort of bass line, a piano part, then write the melody, and then you'll move on to the lyrics. Also, if you can find some karaoke tracks, especially to songs that you don't already know the melody to, that could also be very useful. Just practice improvising a melody for a song that you don't know, where it's a karaoke track. It doesn't have the vocal in there, so you don't actually know what the melody is. And the third main sub-skill that you might want to isolate and practice is lyric writing. And I think there are two very similar ways to practice this as you would practice melody writing. One is essentially to just write poetry. Just work on poetry. Don't even worry about making it into a song. If you practice writing poetry, then you are practicing writing lyrics. And in fact, this could be a good exercise for all of us to do, because it might be the case, and I think this is true for a lot of songwriters, where they kind of have resoundingly mid lyrics, and the excuse is, well, I'm a musician and nobody listens to lyrics, blah, 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 blah. So then their lyrics end up being resoundingly mid because they don't really care about lyrics. But if you concentrate on just writing a poem and the words are all you have, you don't have the melody to elevate the lyrics to the point where really the lyrics kind of suck, but the melody sounds so genuine that people just buy it anyway. You don't have that luxury when you're just writing poetry. So this is a great exercise really for all of us to do, especially if you want to get better at lyric writing. But another thing that you can do is simply rewrite the lyrics to a song that already exists. Now, you could pick a song that you like, but probably that's going to be a struggle because you already like the song. Better might be to rewrite lyrics to a song you hate, or a song that you don't really like, or maybe one that's kind of in the middle, a frustrating song that you thought this had some potential, but they totally screwed it up. That might be a good option as well. So basically just rewriting lyrics for songs that already exist. And lyric writing can absolutely be overwhelming. If you want to try to reduce the overwhelm of lyric writing, a great way to do that is to check out my free 6-step lyric writing checklist, because a great way to make sure that you actually end up with a lyric you're proud of is to not try to force yourself to essentially improvise brilliant poetry, which is almost impossible and certainly relying on the muse or luck. We don't want to rely on luck. We want to be able to have lyrics we can be proud of every time. The only way to do that is with a process, and a process that works, that breaks things down into steps that are actually more doable than sitting, looking at a blank screen or a blank piece of paper and saying, "Be brilliant, self," which is not a great way to go, but I think the way a lot of people write lyrics, and why we end up with lyrics that leave us dissatisfied with the quality. So be sure to check that out, songwritingtheory.com/lyric checklist. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.